go. There it is. All right, we got levels, boys and girls. It means we got a show. Thank you for your patience. And happy day after Easter. It is the 17th of April. I guess official tax day was Saturday, but unofficial tax day is Tuesday. So you get an extra 2 days to send your hard-earned tax dollars to the United States government so they can build more Tomahawk missiles and do more crazy things abroad. Speaking of crazy things abroad, we actually averted World War III over the weekend, and Kim Jong-un decided to have his show of strength.
With the flat Earth symbolism, with the firmament or dome, when it comes to Citibank, when they go to
Kim Jong-un managed to avert we managed to avert World War III when Kim Jong-un's show of force, his show of strength, turned out to be a big dud. And it left the Western world kind of laughing, and it certainly made the, you know what I'm going to do? I think let me see if I can do this. I'm going to try to switch microphones in let's see what I got here. Let's just do this. Let's do this microphone. So it left the Kim Jong-un probably feeling slightly embarrassed about what happened over the weekend because he was firing missiles, and of course the missiles didn't really do anything. And the reason why they didn't do anything, meaning they were kind of duds, is because there's a pretty good chance that the U.S. used a particle beam weapon on the North Koreans. And yeah, we've got these weapons. We have crazy space-age weapons. We have weapons that are really pretty far ahead of the very primitive Tomahawk and the very primitive Moab, which is basically a huge gasoline bomb. If that's the case, then wouldn't it just be really easy for us if we wanted to? I mean, think about this. From terms of non-conventional warfare, using 22nd century weapons, because that's really what they are. And remember, the military-industrial complex is about 50 years ahead of everybody else. So look around what we've got now. Technologically, seems really great. It seems like there's some amazing things. You got robots packing boxes at Amazon. Soon they'll be delivering the boxes to your door. Think about what the military-industrial complex has. And think about how long they've had it. So they likely have low-orbiting satellites with particle beam weapons. The Russians have had them for years. We probably have competing particle beam satellites up in low atmospheric orbit, and this is what they used to take out the missiles that Kim Jong-un was launching. And they've done it before. They've done it with other things. If you go back to the Challenger explosion, which supposedly had to do with some tile or something like that, the Challenger was taken out. I mean, I remember back in the day where, the darker version of the news, I'm not sure what we called it back then. I guess the conspiracy theorists, but these were people that were looking at events from a very different point of view. There was rumors that was actually taken up by the Russians, who have their own version of the particle beam weapon. I'm not the one who was sourcing this. It was George Green, who I talked about last week, the guy who was really on top of the cloning and the robotoid stuff. So if that's the case, if there are particle beam weapons, if they can take somebody out, and they can, quite easily, why do they allow Bashar Assad to stay in office and to stay in Syria? Isn't that a really good question? If they wanted to, why couldn't they just use a particle beam weapon over Syria and focus it on his whereabouts, which they probably can figure out, and just do the trick, or because we have so many pieces of aluminum and metals and all the other attendant crap from chemtrails, which makes all of us very trackable, by the way. Why can't they just induce a heart attack or some kind of aneurysm? It's possible. It's quite possible. So if that's the case and we're dealing with 22nd century weaponry, then to a large extent what they're trying to do with Assad is really kind of a farce. So the question is, why do they keep him inside? Why do they allow him to continue to run the country? Because the really quickest and easiest answer is that the world needs boogeymen. And every now and then a line is crossed and the boogeyman gets taken out. And how quickly, once they decide they're going to take out the boogeyman, how quickly does it happen? Well, through conventional means, it doesn't really take that long. Once they decided to press the metal on Iraq, it didn't take them very long to get Saddam Hussein or whoever that guy was. It didn't take them very long to get Muammar Gaddafi once they decided to really, crank up the sanctions and do everything that they could in order to empower these quote-unquote rebels. And then he was done. It didn't take them very long to remove Hosni Mubarak, did it? The longtime ally of the Americans and the Israelis in Egypt, well, they moved him out pretty quickly. Who knows where he is now? So, he's just gone down the memory hole. And they tried to replace him with the Muslim Brotherhood, and that didn't work. And essentially the Egyptian army is running the country now. So the coup, the Muslim Brotherhood coup, failed. And so they've got to work with the Egyptian army. But what I'm trying to share with you is that when they want somebody gone, they're gone. In the case of Andrew Breitbart, want him gone, he's gone. It's 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Michael Hastings, if they wanted him gone, what did they do? They turned up the RPM on his engine. They disengaged the brakes so he couldn't brake, basically took control of his car and shot him out like a missile and maybe even fired a missile just to make sure that he wasn't going to survive the flaming wreckage, and he's gone. So if they want to take people out, they can. Look at the Russian ambassadors, poisoned, right? There are about four or five Russians just gone. I'm telling you, if they wanted Assad gone, they could remove him. It wouldn't be that hard. Now, the repercussions of that might be a bit tricky, but if it looked like a heart attack, then all of a sudden you've got a bunch of people who are saying, well, who knows? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. So they want him around because they need a boogeyman. They want Kim Jong-un around because they need a boogeyman. And those guys are being toyed with like mice. The cats of the world are toying with them like mice. Kim Jong-un, people ask, well, where does he get his money? He gets his money because he sells technology to Syria, and he sells technology to Iran. And who are the countries that have a bullseye on them in the Middle East for regime change? There you go. So will regime change happen? Will it occur? It can when they want it to. And I'm thinking that they could probably pull the switch on things pretty much just about any time. Anytime if they wanted to. But the reason that they don't is because with the boogeyman, the military-industrial complex gets to order more weapons, the arms contractors, the arms dealers, companies like Raytheon, General Electric, you know it. Who the players are that we know about, and the ones we don't know about, they're making millions and millions and millions of dollars off of what they're about to scoop up and collect over the next 2 days. And that's how the legitimate budget where the legitimate sources or legitimate funds come from. The illegitimate funds are a whole different matter. The illegitimate funds come from places like drug sales, poppy fields, cocaine, you name it. That's where the black budget money is. I guess it is a diet. It's the illicit sources of revenue. So, to just round off this 14 minutes of this 1 half-hour show of 15 minutes, nothing happened this weekend. There was no apocalypse. There was no end time scenario. There was a big parade in North Korea, and the gods of space rained down upon their little festivities. Now, that's not to say that we're out of the woods. We're not. We have some interesting dates coming up, particularly in May, with the Mars transit of Gemini going across Trump's Sun, Uranus true node. There's also McMaster's Mars in Gemini. So there's a lot of pretty intense energy around the month of May. Now, one of the scenarios that I wanted to talk about today, as we shift gears and focus our attention on Jared Kushner again, one of the scenarios for the quote-unquote end times, whether you believe them or not, whether they're biblical prophecy or something that's manufactured in order to bring in some version of the Messiah, and not necessarily the Christian Messiah, because there are other religions that have sprung out of the Fertile Crescent where they have their own version of the Messiah. Yes, it's true. Islam has the Mahdi, M-H-A-D-I. Israel, the good friends in the Jewish community, have their own version of the Messiah. So we have 3 versions of the return of the Messiah coming out of the Abrahamic cradle, the Fertile Crescent. So one of the scenarios that's supposed to take place is that we are supposed to get very close to the Armageddon, where everything looks like it's about to go full tilt bogey nuclear. And then what happens is that at the 11th hour, there is somebody who comes into play and saves the world and brings peace to the world. And I believe that that person is Jared Kushner. Well, it may look like Trump on the surface, but it will likely be Kushner behind the scenes. And then once that occurs, we'll go into this place of false prosperity. And that's when the real workings of the quote-unquote Antichrist kick into play. And I think it's a possibility. I am not a rapturite. I'm not a millennialist Christian. But what we see is these groups and these entities want to play inside of a playbook. And if you look at the whole idea of the Messiah coming from the Jewish tradition, is that they want to accelerate the end time so that this Messiah can indeed reappear. So I think Kushner is playing a very significant role. And it's pretty obvious that without a lot of fact-checking or researching, that this guy has been all over the Trump presidency in the first 100 days. He's sent to the Middle East as a special envoy. He's got all these special projects going on. You can see him wherever there's Trump, there's Kushner. Of course, astrologically, we talked about how Kushner's true node, 10 Leo, is on Trump's Pluto, which is 10 Leo, right in the 12th house. So he's tapping into that Plutonian source of power. His purpose is right there, connected to the deeper well of Trump, his connections, his shadow, his weaknesses, his pride, all those things we associate with Leo, but also the deep power of Pluto in the 12th house. And Trump's right on top, or Kushner's right on top of it. And we all know that Kushner runs the show out of his family offices at 666. What is it? Manhattan. What is it? 666. What's the street? Anyway, I just had Fifth Avenue. 666 Fifth Avenue. Family paid $2.1 billion for that business, or for the building. Kushner has deep ties to George Soros. He and his brother took over $200 million from Soros for a real estate venture. So the apparatus, or one apparatus of the deep state, as it relates to the neoliberal and social Marxist overthrow of Western civilization, he has ties to inside the Trump White House. Like the highest security clearance that can be given has been given to Jared Kushner. He's in on everything. He knows everything. He has direct ties to a number of sources that are outside of the White House. So no doubt he's keeping them informed. And what's interesting about Kushner is that there are very little interviews with him. He does not talk to the press. There was a recent interview where he was walking into his version of Trump Tower, 666, and a reporter asked him a question, and he just basically slid right past him and said something very innocuous, thank you very much, and just kept moving. So he is a consummate kind of shadow master. And there's very little to attach to when it comes to whatever he has said in public. And he's going to say very, very little. Very little. And when Trump leaves the White House, which he will, I don't believe he'll make it through the next 4 years. It will be Jared Kushner who will remain. He'll remain on, and I would not be surprised if Mike Pence makes him vice president, although that might be too obvious. Kushner doesn't need a title. He's got all the power right now. Let's talk about who he's recently hired. This is a very interesting development. He's recently hired a guy by the name of Josh Raffel. And he's become I don't know what role he has, but Kushner has this new division. It is the White House Office of American Innovation. Now, apparently, he has this idea called the Connectivity Project, which is fairly shadowy. And the Connectivity Project has to do with apparently linking up people, biometrics, information, so that anything can be known about anyone in any given situation at any time. This is kind of what I'm being able to piece together, but there can be a lot more, because just like Kushner himself, the idea of the Connectivity Project is quite vague. But he's hired Josh Raffel, and Josh Raffel is going to be working in the White House Office of American Innovation. And he originally represented Kushner when he worked for Hitzig Strategies, which is interesting. Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, has been tasked with injecting ideas from the business world. Hope Hicks, another Hitzig veteran, is part of the Trump administration's communication team. After leaving Hitzig in 2015, Raffel ran communications for Blumhouse Productions, the producer of horror hits such as The Purge and Insidious. In a business studded with profane and controlling mouthpieces, he is well respected among entertainment journalists for his sane, sensible style and his wits. Raffel confirmed his new job to Variety, but declined to offer additional comments. Raffel will be replaced at Blumhouse by Terry Everett, blah, blah, blah. The Office of American Innovation is intended to be nonpartisan and is working with several industry leaders. Get ready for this, such as Elon Musk, Tim Cook, and Bill Gates, to make government more efficient and forward-looking. Trump won the presidency in part because he promised to bring an entrepreneurial style to the White House. Kushner's broad portfolio of assignments, from being tasked with negotiating a peace agreement between the Israelis and Palestinians to engaging in diplomacy with Iraq and China, have raised eyebrows. Rafael, who is based in New York and Los Angeles, will relocate to Washington, D.C. for the job. So here we have a guy who was helping promote films like The Purge and Insidious, really, really dark stuff, who's now coming into the White House. Now, what else can we learn about Rafael? Let's go into his bio just for a little bit here. He's clearly a millennial. Let's see what else we have. Well, this is just another link to Rafael. Want to see what projects Josh Rafael is developing. So he's another millennial. He's 32 years old. And the millennials are starting to have a very strong and pronounced influence on the White House. Look at where Saturn is. It's in Sagittarius, and it's also retrograding, but it's in Sagittarius. The next stop for Saturn will be Capricorn. And as it begins to move into Capricorn, one of the things it will do is it will begin to conjunct Neptune in Capricorn and Uranus in Capricorn inside of the millennials' charts, because many of them have this Neptune-Uranus conjunction, which is very unusual. I think the last time there was a Neptune-Uranus conjunction in Capricorn was about 8,000 years ago, something like that. Doesn't happen very often. So when Saturn it comes in and starts to hit Neptune and starts to hit Uranus, their Uranus generationally, all of a sudden you're going to start to see more millennials begin to make their influence felt in the public sphere. And I'm not just talking about things like TV or music. We've seen that. But we're talking Capricorn. And this is going to be business. This is going to be governmental. And they are going to unite and have a link generationally in which many other generations just do not have. Because Pluto and Scorpio, which is really sort of the hallmark of where the millennials begin, that is the most powerfully transpersonal aspects of Pluto. They're the first transpersonal Plutonian generation of basically, you'd have to go back to Pluto and Pisces to have such a transpersonal, generational kind of influence in a generation, and that goes all the way back to like the early 1800s, mid 1800s, where there's the what they call the Fourth Great Awakening in the United States. It's a very kind of powerful religious time. You have people like John Smith, John L. Smith, or John Smith, the guy who started Mormonism. So it's the rise of the charismatics with Pluto in Pisces. Anyway, this is the most transpersonal generation since that time. And we're going to see them enter into the Capricornian spheres of influence because they're that age right now. They're 32, 33, 34, and their influence is going to be marked. And what they'll do is they'll create kind of a bureaucratic version of the millennial experience. It's going to be very interesting to see how the millennials are going to respond to somebody like Kushner and behind the scenes, Rafael. Now, the whole thing with Pluto and Scorpio is not an upfront power player. Scorpio is always behind the scenes. I mean, look at the 8th house, the ruler of Scorpio. Anybody that's got sun in the 8th house, they're hard to see. They're hard to sort of figure out. They're not always understood. If they know themselves, it doesn't really matter. They're happy being behind the scenes. But if they're not, if they're not, if they don't know who they are, then it can be tricky for an 8th house sun. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at here is that Pluto and Scorpio will not be ostentatious. They will be behind the scenes in terms of how they manifest their power. They'll work through whoever is in the traditional seats of power, but they'll be the one pushing the buttons. And so it's going to be interesting to see how people like Elon Musk, Tim Cook, Bill Gates all come together and create something inside of the White House and a millennial kind of point of access for the government and people who might be interested in tapping into that, again, from a millennial perspective. It's going to be fascinating to see what comes out of this, and perhaps even a little bit daunting and scary. Already, there have been monikers placed upon Jared Kushner as being the next Antichrist or the Antichrist. And based on scripture coming from 3 different traditions, he certainly fits at least kind of the early billing of the Antichrist. If he brings peace to the Middle East, then apparently it also coheres with scripture inside of the book of Daniel. And if that's the case, then he is rubber stamped. He's got a big 666 on his forehead. But it's interesting to note the technological synergy between Musk and Cook and Gates, and Jared Kushner sort of pushing that through his very mysterious Office of American Innovation, the OAI, and what comes out of it. Some people think that it might be the chip itself. A lot of people think we're already chipped, and that we've got enough aluminum and nanobytes and all the chemtrail cocktail inside of us that we don't need a chip. I mean, like right now, it's already bonded to our own particular genetic signature, which is probably our own barcode, right? Our own RFID, which makes us all quite unique. Anyway, it's something to keep an eye on as we race through the next 100 days of the Trump administration. And as everybody else who has been so loyal to Trump and everything that he stood for at the beginning of his surge towards the presidency begins to not just reevaluate their relationship with the Trump presidency, but also with Trump himself. There'll be other people who are going to come on board. And we've seen a rise in popularity, about a 15% rise in popularity now. Once he decided to break out the big gas bomb and a couple of the tomahawks, everybody that was on the neocon right, the far right, that wants war, they began to sing his praises. People that were on the neoliberal left, especially people with pro-Arabic or Muslim interests, began to sing his praises because Syria is essentially a Christian state. There's a lot of Muslims, but almost as many Christians. They began to sing his praises as well. So Trump is beginning to make new friends in different parts of the political aisle. So even though part of his base will abandon him, he'll begin to do more things that are going to be quite amenable to a new group of people who had previously denounced him. One of his new advisors is a guy by the name of Schwartzman, who lives in Florida and is a Mar-a-Lago buddy. He's an Aquarian. He's apparently replaced Steve Bannon. Like Kushner has moved on. Kushner is no longer the ear in the White House. Kushner is the White House. So Trump needs somebody else to talk to and to get ideas from. And it's his Schwartzman character who he's getting a lot of input from. And Schwartzman has an interesting past. He started the Blackstone Group, which is a very, very powerful multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. One of their investments is a company called Nalco, and some of you may remember Nalco from the BP disaster. Nalco was the company that produced Corexit, the horrific dispersant that was, I'm not sure if they're still spraying in the Gulf, but they sprayed for years and years and years after the BP incident because they wanted to sell as much Corexit as possible. And it did a number on people, and it did a number on the marine life of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, it didn't quite turn the Gulf of Mexico into the black algae source for new energy, but it did a lot of damage and managed to skirt major legal findings and major legal rulings in favor of the people that worked on those crappy $15 or $20 an hour jobs spraying Corexit, who suffered really severe health issues. And there was a court case, I think it was ruled on in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, and the judge basically threw the case out. And the reason why the judge threw the case out is because if he had ruled on the case and on the side of the workers who had been neurologically damaged by Corexit, then in future scenarios where there would be disasters, that other companies would not be able to respond in a timely fashion for fear of some kind of civil retribution. Is that bullshit or what? It's like, just in case we have another one of these, we don't want to prevent companies like Nalco to be able to have their poisonous, toxin-laced brew to be sprayed in the Gulf. Because there's a greater picture here. It was ridiculous. Anyway, Blackstone Group, which is headed by this guy Schwartzman, has key investments in a number of companies, including Nalco. The interesting thing about Schwartzman is that he went to Yale. He was a year before George Bush, President of the United States, right? Former president, who's Skull and Bones. Well, Schwartzman was there a year before him, and Schwartzman happens to be Skull and Bones as well. So now we have a Skull and Bones member inside the White House. And we also have CFR people inside the White House. We've got Dina Powell, who's a member of the CFR and the Trilateral Commission. And they've got Trump's ear. Dina Powell has Ivanka Trump's ear. So we have these globalists, these major globalists. Schwartzman told Trump to change his position on the dream cities and all the immigration-related material. Probably had him change his position on China. So Trump has gone from being a nationalist to a globalist almost overnight, if indeed that's Trump. And how would Schwartzman know? He's roll the Trump clone out there. So we have a major change into the guard. And this administration is going to look a whole lot more like the George Bush administration, with a dash of millennial fervor and whatever Kushner and his millennial pals are going to be cooking up here. Childhood's End. Well, here we are on the day after Easter. Very intense weekend in a lot of ways. Super intense. And me personally, I had to go through some pretty powerful material with my kid. I'm still not reconciled with it. I'll talk more about it later in the week. But there's always this sense here on the other side of Easter that we reassemble our atoms and we come into the world from a different perspective. A place where there is this sense of rebirth in some ways. It's been raining here in Texas, and sometimes when that happens, there's a nice feel to it, even though the rain itself is artificial. So as we start this week, the first day after Easter, and you move through your life, and you begin to look around and try to get a sense of where you are and what's happening in this universe, to try to understand kind of where it's all headed, the best thing you can do is go back to Friday's show, is be in the moment. Because the moment will take you places, and sometimes that moment can be really uncomfortable. Trust me. But you have to stay with it and get through it. And when you do, then there's some interesting gnosis that's available for you on the other side of that. All right, so that's it. That's today's 15 Minutes of Flame. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thanks for hanging in there with me today as I got through sort of the audio muddle at the beginning of the show. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time with more insights, analysis, wit, humor, and hopefully a little bit of enlightenment. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible.